The morning call, picture this. It's 6:15 a.m., and I'm standing on my family's 60-acre ranch in Wyoming, steam rising from my coffee mug while watching the sunrise paint the Rockies gold. My phone buzzes with that familiar emergency tone. This is 911 dispatch. We have reports that you're trespassing on private property and need to vacate immediately. I actually laughed out loud. I mean, what would you do if someone called the cops on you for standing on land your family's owned for 85 years? I pulled out my leather badge wallet with practiced calm. Ma'am, tell whoever called that Detective Marcus Stone is exactly where he needs to be, on his own property. Through my neighbor's McMansion window, I could see Patricia Whitfield's face go white as fresh snow. She still had those expensive binoculars pressed to her eyes like some kind of suburban surveillance specialist, her mouth hanging open in shock. The smell of hay and morning dew mixed with the mountain air, and I knew this was about to get very interesting. What would you do in my situation? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet some of you have your own HOA war stories that make mine look tame. Before we dive into this absolutely epic takedown, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. HOA Hidden Stories is your go-to channel for exposing neighborhood tyrants, and today's story proves that sometimes the badge comes in handy when dealing with fake authority. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name is Marcus Stone. I'm 47, and after 18 years as a detective with Wyoming State Police and a divorce that felt like getting mauled by a bear trained in family law, I moved back to the family ranch I inherited from my grandfather. 60 acres of pure Wyoming heaven that's been in our family since 1938, when Grandpa Samuel bought it with his railroad pension money. The old red barn still smells like machine oil and decades of honest work. The kind of place where I learned to fix engines at 10 years old and thought I'd grow old in peace. Then they built Ridgeview Estates right next to my property line, 6 years ago. 52 McMansions with matching stone facades and coordinated landscape lighting that probably cost more than most people's cars. But honestly, most residents were decent neighbors who loved buying fresh eggs from my chicken coop and watching their kids feed Daisy, my Highland cow. Yes, I named her Daisy. Sue me. But then there was Patricia Whitfield, 54 years old with platinum blonde hair that required more monthly maintenance than my entire ranch, a master's degree in interior design she mentioned every 30 seconds, and the attitude of someone who confused decorating wealthy homes with actually being wealthy. Her husband Richard owned Whitfield Development, the company that built Ridgeview, and they lived in the biggest house with a lawn so artificially perfect. It probably violated several environmental protection acts. The declaration of war. The trouble started on a Thursday morning in July when I heard the unmistakable sound of designer heels on gravel. Patricia marched across my property line carrying a leather portfolio thick enough to stop bullets. Her overpowering gardenia perfume making my chickens stop pecking and stare in confusion. "Mr. Stone," she announced with that condescending tone that makes your fillings ache, "I'm here on official Ridgeview Homeowners Association business." I wiped my hands on my work jeans and looked up from the tractor I was repairing. "Ma'am, I don't believe I'm part of your HOA." Her laugh sounded like a Mercedes trying to start in a blizzard. "Oh, but you are now. When Ridgeview Estates was incorporated, your property was automatically included in our covenants for consistency purposes." She thrust a certified letter at me like it was a court summons from hell. "You have 45 days to bring this agricultural situation into compliance with community standards." The legal jargon made my detective brain switch into evidence gathering mode, but the demands were crystal clear. Remove the barn, eliminate the chicken coop, shut down the vegetable stand, and relocate all unsightly farm equipment. The kicker? $750 per day in fines if I didn't comply. The taste of morning coffee turned bitter as Patricia stood there with arms crossed, wearing that smug smile like she'd just checkmate Bobby Fischer himself. Property values in our community depend on maintaining certain aesthetic standards, she continued. But I noticed something interesting. She kept glancing toward my land with this hungry expression, like she was measuring it for something bigger than HOA compliance. Your little hobby ranch might seem charming, but it's costing each of us thousands in resale potential. Here's what didn't add up. Most Ridgeview residents actually supported me. They'd stop by the farm stand, let their kids pet Daisy, and talk about how refreshing it was having authentic country life next door. But Patricia had rallied a small faction who thought my ranch was destroying their suburban paradise. That night, sitting on my porch listening to Daisy chew grass while watching the last light fade behind the mountains, I realized this wasn't just about HOA rules or aesthetic standards. Patricia's eyes when she looked at my 60 acres, her husband's development company, that calculating expression, this was about power, control, and land that somebody wanted for reasons they weren't sharing yet. The crunch of gravel under her, designer heels, still echoed in my head, and my detective instincts were screaming that a woman who'd call 911 on a police detective standing on his own family land wasn't going to stop with a strongly worded letter. The investigation begins. Patricia didn't waste time escalating. 4 days after delivering her ultimatum, she filed a formal complaint with the county health department claiming my ranch created public health hazards due to uncontrolled animal waste and attracted disease-carrying rodents. She organized a petition among Ridgeview residents and managed to get 14 signatures out of 52 homes. Hardly a groundswell of support, but she posted those signatures on the neighborhood Facebook group like she'd won a landslide election. The woman actually created a PowerPoint presentation with pie charts showing community concern levels and shared it in 3 different Facebook groups. The photos she shared made my neat, well-maintained ranch look like some kind of agricultural disaster zone, all shot from weird angles that made my chicken coop look like a condemned building and my vegetable garden look like an overgrown wasteland. She'd used telephoto lenses and strategic cropping to make normal farm equipment look like abandoned industrial waste. But here's where Patricia made her first big mistake. She never actually read the HOA's original incorporation documents. See, 18 years of detective work teaches you that most people assume someone else did their homework, and Patricia was banking on that assumption. She'd been operating on pure entitlement and the belief that expensive lawyers could retroactively legitimize whatever she wanted to do. The county records office became my second office over the next week. I requested every single document related to Ridgeview Estates formation, going back to the original land surveys from 1998. The smell of old paper and bureaucratic coffee filled the records office as I spread those documents across a metal table, remembering something my training sergeant used to say: "The truth is always in the paperwork, Stone. Always." Dorothy Martinez, the county clerk who'd been filing documents since the Carter administration, became my unofficial research partner. "That Whitfield woman's been in here 6 times demanding to know what records you've requested," she whispered, conspiratorially. "She's nervous about something, and nervous people make mistakes." That's when I found it, buried in subsection 15D of the original incorporation agreement. Existing agricultural operations shall be permanently exempt from all aesthetic and operational restrictions as grandfathered land use. The clause was written in plain English, impossible to misinterpret, and signed by Richard Whitfield himself as the developer. Permanently exempt. Those 2 beautiful words meant Patricia's entire legal case was built on quicksand, and I couldn't wait to watch her sink. But I also discovered something else interesting. The original development plans showed my 60 acres marked as Future Expansion Zone, with preliminary sketches for additional luxury homes. Patricia wasn't just harassing me about aesthetics, she was trying to clear the way for Phase 2 of their development project. I decided to call her bluff about public health hazards by requesting an inspection from the county health department myself. The inspector who showed up was a no-nonsense woman named Carol Rodriguez, who'd been checking agricultural operations for 25 years and had the weathered hands and sharp eyes of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. She walked every inch of my property with scientific precision, tested soil samples for contamination, examined the chicken coop against state health standards, checked my water sources for bacterial contamination, and even evaluated Daisy's living conditions against animal welfare regulations. The inspection took 4 hours and covered everything from manure management to food safety protocols. Carol also brought her camera and documented everything with professional thoroughness, creating a photographic record that would counter Patricia's carefully manipulated images. Whoever filed this complaint either hasn't been on your property or is deliberately lying, she told me as we walked the fence line. This operation is cleaner than most commercial facilities. When Carol finished, she actually smiled and shook her head in professional admiration. Mr. Stone, this operation exceeds organic certification requirements by a significant margin. I've inspected million-dollar facilities that aren't this well maintained. Whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time. Her official report praised my ranch as an exemplary model of sustainable agricultural practices and recommended me for the state's Agricultural Excellence Program. The taste of vindication was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie, especially knowing that Patricia would receive a copy of the glowing review. That evening, I sat on my porch reviewing Carol's report while Daisy grazed peacefully in the golden evening light. The mountains stood like silent sentinels in the distance, and for the first time since this mess began, I felt like the universe might actually have a sense of justice. But my detective instincts told me this was just the beginning. Patricia's desperate petition drive and false health complaints suggested someone who was running out of legitimate options and starting to panic. Desperate people make dangerous choices, and I had a feeling Patricia was just getting started with her escalation campaign. Following the money, while I was building my legal defense, something interesting happened. Patricia's husband Richard quietly approached me one evening as I was closing up the farm stand. He looked nervous, kept glancing back toward his mansion, like Patricia might be watching through those expensive binoculars. "Marcus," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what would it take for you to sell this place? I'm talking 50% above market value. Cash deal. We handle all the paperwork. 50% above market value for property that was supposedly dragging down everyone's home prices? That seemed awfully generous for land that was apparently worthless." The pieces started clicking together like shells loading into my service weapon. Something I'd learned during my detective training was that when people's actions don't match their stated motivations, you follow the money trail. This wasn't about aesthetics or property values. Patricia and Richard wanted my land for something specific, and they were willing to pay premium prices to get it. "Thanks for the offer," I told Richard, "but this ranch isn't for sale at any price." His face fell like he'd been expecting that answer but hoping for a different one. "Look, between you and me, Patricia gets these ideas in her head, and once she's committed to something..." He trailed off, but the warning was clear enough. The community reaction was swift and decisive. The local newspaper ran a story with the headline, "Detectives Ranch Under HOA Fire," and suddenly I had neighboring ranchers stopping by to offer support. 4 Ridgeview families publicly withdrew their signatures from Patricia's petition, with one posting on Facebook. "We signed before we understood the situation. The Stone Ranch is exactly what makes this community special." My law enforcement training kicked into full gear, and I started treating this like any other criminal investigation. Every interaction with Patricia got documented. Every conversation got recorded. Wyoming, being a one-party consent state, was something I'd used in fraud cases before, and it applied just as well to HOA harassment. Every piece of correspondence got filed and copied because I'd seen too many cases fall apart over missing paperwork. The escalation Patricia's response to losing community support was predictable. She got louder, more desperate, and significantly more unhinged. She started posting daily updates on social media about the ongoing agricultural crisis in Ridgeview, complete with photographs taken through telephoto lenses that made me feel like I was under criminal surveillance by a suburban spy network. Her Facebook posts became increasingly paranoid and detailed. She'd document the times people visited my farm stand, photograph license plates of customers, and create elaborate theories about why families buying vegetables pose threats to community safety. The woman was essentially conducting 24/7 surveillance, operations from her McMansion command center. The sound of her heels on my gravel driveway became as regular as morning roosters, and each visit brought new complaints, new threats, new demands that grew more absurd by the day. She started carrying a clipboard and stopwatch, timing how long customers spent at my farm stand, and claiming excessive traffic was creating safety hazards for Ridgeview children. Patricia even started approaching my customers directly, intercepting families as they walked to their cars with bags of fresh vegetables. She'd lecture them about enabling agricultural nuisances and hand them printed flyers explaining how supporting my ranch was damaging their property values. Several customers reported feeling intimidated and harassed by her aggressive confrontations. But something beautiful was happening despite Patricia's harassment campaign. The 4 families who'd withdrawn support from her petition started shopping at my farm stand regularly, bringing friends and neighbors who'd never visited before. Word was spreading beyond Ridgeview that there was this local ranch where you could get the best beef in the county, watch your kids learn where food actually comes from, and support a detective who wasn't backing down from a bully. Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, a retired school teacher from Ridgeview, started bringing her grandchildren for weekly visits. "My family's been ranching in Wyoming for 4 generations," she told Patricia during one confrontation. "This young man represents everything good about our agricultural heritage, and I'll be damned if some HOA dictator drives him away." The local newspaper picked up the story after Patricia made the mistake of harassing their photographer during a visit to my ranch. Editor Tom Bradley ran a front-page article with the headline, "Detectives Ranch Under HOA Fire," complete with photos showing the contrast between my well-maintained operation and Patricia's wild accusations. Regional TV news followed up with an investigative piece about HOA overreach in rural communities, featuring interviews with neighbors who supported my ranch and legal experts who questioned Patricia's authority. The segment made Patricia look like exactly what she was, a suburban tyrant trying to destroy a family agricultural operation for personal gain. My law enforcement training kicked into full gear, and I started treating this like any other criminal. Investigation involving systematic harassment. Every interaction with Patricia got documented with professional precision. Every conversation got recorded. Wyoming being a one-party consent state was something I'd used in domestic violence and fraud cases before, and it applied perfectly to HOA harassment. Every piece of correspondence got filed chronologically and copied in triplicate, because I'd seen too many cases fall apart over missing paperwork. I created detailed incident reports for each harassment event, complete with timestamps, witness information, and photographic evidence. If this went to court, I wanted documentation that would impress federal prosecutors. The harassment escalated when Patricia started conducting what she called compliance inspections of my property, walking my fence line with cameras and notebooks, photographing everything from my chicken coop to my vegetable gardens. She'd arrive at dawn with expensive surveying equipment, measuring distances, and taking GPS coordinates like she was preparing for a military operation. When I asked her to leave my property, she'd claim she was on public right-of-way or county easements, clearly having researched property boundaries to find legal loopholes for her surveillance activities. The woman had transformed from annoying neighbor to full-time agricultural stalker, dedicating hours daily to documenting my legitimate farming activities. By the end of that first month, I realized Patricia had made a critical tactical error. Instead of keeping this quiet and handling it through backroom deals like most development schemes, she'd made it public and turned herself into the villain of her own story. In a community that valued honesty, hard work, and standing up to bullies, she'd picked the wrong fight with the wrong guy. Patricia's desperation was showing in increasingly erratic behavior, and my detective experience had taught me that desperate people make stupid mistakes. The question was whether she'd crossed the line into criminal behavior before I could build a case strong enough to stop her permanently. 3 weeks after losing her first round, she filed a false police report claiming I had threatened her with violence during our last conversation. I was actually on duty when the call came in, and my captain looked at me with that expression cops get when paperwork doesn't make sense. Stone, Patricia Whitfield, says you threatened to deal with her permanently during your last conversation. Care to explain? I pulled out my phone and showed him the body cam footage I'd been recording since this whole mess started. What we saw was Patricia doing 90% of the yelling while I stood with arms crossed, asking her politely to leave my property. The closest thing to a threat was me saying I'd deal with this through proper legal channels, which in Patricia's panicked mind apparently became a death threat. My captain shook his head and filed the complaint in what we call the crazy neighbor folder, the federal interest. The same afternoon brought animal control to my door after Patricia reported dangerous livestock threatening public safety. The officer took one look at my 6 chickens pecking peacefully in their coop and Daisy chewing grass by the fence, then turned to me with that look people get when they realize they've been pranked. She said you had aggressive farm animals. I was expecting something with fangs, not a cow that's trying to make friends with my boots. His official report declared my livestock exceptionally well socialized and posing no threat to public safety whatsoever. But Patricia's masterpiece came next. She started parking her BMW directly across my farm stand entrance during peak hours, claiming she was monitoring traffic safety concerns. The woman complaining about too much traffic was literally creating traffic jams. My security cameras captured everything. Patricia sitting in her luxury car with a clipboard, writing down license plates like some kind of suburban secret police, occasionally getting out to lecture families about supporting agricultural nuisances that threaten property values. Here's something I'd learned from 18 years of handling domestic disputes. Documentation always beats confrontation. Instead of giving Patricia the screaming match she wanted, I filed harassment and obstruction complaints with time-stamped photos and video evidence. Every interaction got recorded. Every incident got reported. I was building a paper trail that would make any prosecutor's job easy. While Patricia was busy destroying her own credibility with false police reports, I was digging deeper into public records, following that nagging feeling about Richard's generous cash offer. What I found in the county planning office made everything crystal clear. Preliminary development sketches for a luxury subdivision expansion that included my 60 acres, filed 8 months before Patricia's first complaint. This wasn't random HOA harassment. This was a calculated business strategy to force me off land they needed for their next project. The community rises. The community response was everything I could have hoped for. When word spread about Patricia's blocking tactics, 4 local veterans started volunteering as unofficial customer service representatives, positioning themselves with lawn chairs and coffee thermoses to ensure people could access my driveway. They weren't there to intimidate anyone, just to provide a friendly presence that happened to make Patricia extremely uncomfortable. My favorite moment came when Mrs. Davidson from Ridgeview, a retired federal prosecutor who didn't suffer fools, walked over to Patricia's BMW during one of her surveillance sessions. "Excuse me, dear," she said in that voice prosecutors use on lying defendants, "but you're blocking access to the best beef in 3 counties. Either buy something or move along." The look on Patricia's face as she realized even her own neighbors were turning against her was worth every minute of harassment I'd endured. But I knew this was just the beginning. Patricia's actions were getting more erratic, more desperate, and people with nothing left to lose tend to make even bigger mistakes. The question wasn't whether she'd escalate again. It was how far she'd go before she crossed a line there was no coming back from. The criminal enterprise Patricia was done playing small-time neighborhood games. By month 4, she'd hired Wellington and Associates, an expensive law firm from Denver that charged $650 an hour and specialized in what they politely called property optimization services. Their website featured testimonials from developers who'd successfully resolved disputes with problematic rural landowners, corporate speak for forcing family farmers off their land. The lead attorney, Harrison Wellington III, was everything you'd expect from someone who'd inherited both his name and his practice. Perfectly styled silver hair, $3,000 suits, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having lost a case to anyone who couldn't afford to fight back. His specialty was using legal intimidation to bankrupt rural families until they surrendered their generational property for pennies on the dollar. Their nuclear option was a comprehensive civil lawsuit claiming my ranch had caused $350,000 in diminished property values across Ridgeview estates, demanding an emergency injunction to shut down all agricultural operations immediately. The lawsuit was professionally crafted intimidation designed to bury me in legal costs that would exceed most people's annual income within the first month. The legal documents were thick enough to use as building materials, filled with sophisticated language about agricultural nuisances, environmental hazards, and systematic degradation of residential property values. They'd even hired expert witnesses, professional consultants who made their living testifying that family farms were incompatible with suburban development. What Wellington didn't know was that I'd been building my own legal team since this mess began. My ex-partner Jessica Rodriguez had become a federal prosecutor specializing in organized crime and was feeding me intelligence about their firm's tactics and track record. "Marcus," she told me over coffee at our usual downtown cafe, "this outfit's pulled the same stunt in 6 states over the past decade. They bet on people not being able to afford prolonged legal fights and not understanding their actual property rights." Jessica spread copies of similar lawsuits across our table, showing identical language and strategies used against ranchers, farmers, and rural families throughout the Mountain West. "Look at this pattern. Same expert witnesses, same inflated damage claims, same pressure tactics designed to force quick settlements. But I could afford the fight because I had something better than money. I had professional investigative skills, federal law enforcement connections, and a growing suspicion that this whole mess was bigger than one crazy neighbor with delusions of suburban grandeur. My detective instincts were screaming that Patricia's desperation wasn't just about property values or aesthetic concerns. There was something deeper driving her obsession with my land, and her willingness to spend tens of thousands on legal fees suggested financial stakes that went far beyond HOA compliance. So I started following the money trail the way I'd learned to track down organized crime families during my years investigating financial fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy cases. Following shell companies, tracking property transfers, analyzing development timelines, and connecting financial relationships that criminals thought they'd hidden. What I found over the next 2 weeks of intensive investigation changed everything and revealed a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond Patricia's personal harassment campaign. Whitfield Development had used identical harassment tactics against 7 other rural property owners in neighboring counties over the past 8 years. The pattern was always the same: identify properties adjacent to potential developments, create or manipulate HOA restrictions to harass existing landowners, use legal intimidation and manufactured community pressure to force below-market sales, then immediately flip the land to shell companies for massive profits. Every single victim had eventually sold their family land for fractions of its development value, usually within 12 to 18 months of when the harassment campaigns began. Properties that sold for $200,000 under duress were being developed into subdivisions worth millions within 2 years of the forced sales. But the most damning evidence came from internal emails I obtained through my federal law enforcement contacts. Whitfield Development had detailed playbooks for what they called rural acquisition strategies, complete with psychological profiles of different personality types and customized harassment approaches designed to maximize pressure while maintaining legal deniability. They had researched me specifically, knowing my law enforcement background, my divorce trauma, my desire for peaceful retirement. Patricia's campaign wasn't random neighborhood drama, it was a calculated, the trap is set. While I was building a federal case, Patricia was building her own downfall. Her behavior had become increasingly unhinged. Midnight property line inspections, photographing my customers' license plates, filing complaints about everything from excessive cow mooing to threatening vegetable arrangements. The woman was documenting her own harassment campaign and didn't realize it. Her biggest mistake came when she tried to bribe County Building Inspector Robert Chen to condemn my barn as structurally unsafe. Robert had inspected that barn 3 times in 8 years and knew it was solid as a rock. So when Patricia slid an envelope across a coffee shop table containing $3,000 cash, he immediately called the sheriff's department. "She offered me $3,000 to find violations that don't exist," Robert reported. "I've seen desperate people, but this lady's completely lost her mind." The bribery attempt was Patricia's first provable felony, but my prosecutor friend Jessica convinced me to hold off on arrests. "Let her keep digging," Jessica advised. "Every move she makes gives us more evidence, and desperate people make bigger mistakes." That's exactly what happened. Convinced she was about to lose everything, Patricia started spreading rumors that I was dealing drugs from my farm stand, filing false police reports claiming to have witnessed suspicious late-night activities involving unmarked vehicles and package exchanges. She was describing people buying vegetables after work, but her reports were serious enough to trigger a DEA investigation. When federal agents showed up at my ranch expecting a drug operation and found an off-duty detective growing organic tomatoes and raising Highland cattle, they were not amused. The lead agent, a no-nonsense woman named Detective Riley, reviewed my documentation and shook her head. "Detective Stone, you've got enough evidence here for federal fraud charges. This isn't neighbor drama anymore. This is organized criminal activity." Justice served. The end came faster than I expected. Patricia had scheduled what she called a mandatory emergency meeting for all residents, planning to present her final evidence of my supposed criminal activities. She'd sent official-looking notices threatening legal action against anyone who didn't attend, complete with her fake letterhead and fraudulent authority claims. The community center was packed that night. Residents, media, and several unfamiliar faces who'd later reveal themselves as federal investigators. Patricia had arranged poster boards covered with photographs, charts, and folders bulging with what she called irrefutable proof of criminal conspiracy. For 20 minutes, she presented her evidence with the confidence of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. She displayed photos of families buying vegetables, claiming they showed drug transactions. She played audio recordings of normal farm stand conversations, insisting they contained criminal communications in agricultural code language. The audience grew increasingly uncomfortable as Patricia revealed the depth of her surveillance obsession. But when she called for a citizen's arrest of the corrupt detective who has terrorized our neighborhood, the room fell silent. That's when I stood up, walked to the front, and pulled out my badge along with federal arrest warrants. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Detective Marcus Stone and Ms. Whitfield. You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to commit extortion." Patricia's breakdown was complete and devastating. As handcuffs clicked into place, she screamed about communist conspiracies and police corruption while her own hired videographer captured every moment for posterity. But the real shock came when Agent Martinez addressed the stunned residents. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've all been victims of systematic fraud designed to steal your property. Every HOA fee, every fine, every threat was part of an organized criminal enterprise." The taste of justice was sweeter than anything I'd experienced in 18 years of law enforcement. The sweet victory. 6 months later, justice had exceeded my wildest expectations. Patricia Whitfield received 4 years in federal prison, $500,000 in restitution payments, and the satisfaction of knowing her criminal enterprise had been completely dismantled. Richard Whitfield's development company went bankrupt, paying victim restitution and legal fees. The FBI investigation revealed 7 other communities where they'd used identical tactics, helping dozens of families recover stolen property and financial damages. My ranch evolved into something I'd never dreamed possible. What started as a quiet place to heal from my divorce became a thriving agricultural education center that brought families from across Wyoming to learn about sustainable farming and connect with their food sources. The annual Stone Ranch Harvest Festival became the county's biggest community event, raising funds for agricultural scholarships and rural property protection advocacy. Our first festival raised $40,000, helping farm kids pursue college degrees while staying connected to their rural roots. Personal happiness found me in ways I never expected. Dr. Lisa Parker, the veterinarian who'd started visiting during the harassment campaign, became my partner in every sense that matters. We're planning a wedding next fall, right here among the apple trees that Patricia once wanted destroyed. The legal precedent from our case revolutionized property rights across Wyoming. The legislature passed the Agricultural Heritage Protection Act, requiring HOA transparency and protecting rural operations from suburban development pressure. But the most beautiful transformation happened in Ridgeview itself. Without Patricia's manufactured drama, neighbors discovered they actually enjoyed each other's company. The community became known for cooperation rather than conflict, and property values increased as people sought homes in a neighborhood famous for standing up to bullies. Today, as I write this with Daisy grazing in evening sunlight and the aroma of Lisa's homemade bread drifting from our kitchen, I'm grateful for every minute of Patricia's harassment campaign. Her attempts to destroy my peace gave me exactly the life I never knew I wanted. What's your HOA horror story? Have you dealt with fake HOA authority, harassment campaigns, or property bullies who think they can push rural families around? Share your wildest encounters in the comments. Your stories help others recognize these tactics and fight back.